Kelith stood at the edge of the observation deck, her shimmering blue skin reflecting faintly in the glass. The vast expanse of space stretched out before her, dotted with stars and distant nebulae that glowed like cosmic lanterns. She had always found solace in the silence of the universe, a contrast to the chaos inside her mind. Tonight, however, something felt different. A tug at the edges of her memory pulled her thoughts away from the beauty outside. It started as a flicker, a fleeting image that danced just beyond reach. Kelith closed her eyes, letting it come closer. Slowly, fragments began to form. A cold, barren moon, the sound of wind howling through jagged rocks, and then, most vividly, a face, a human face, weathered but kind, framed by dark hair streaked with silver. His voice echoed in her mind, muffled yet warm, saying words she couldn't quite make out. Her heart quickened. This wasn't just a random thought, it was a memory, one she hadn't accessed in years. She opened her eyes abruptly, her breath fogging the glass. It was impossible, wasn't it? That moment belonged to another lifetime, buried under layers of new experiences and responsibilities. Yet here it was, surfacing unbidden. Kelith turned to Aegis, her AI companion, who hovered nearby. "Do you believe memories can return after so long?" she asked, her tone hesitant. Aegis's holographic interface lit up softly. "Memories are complex constructs," it replied in its calm, mechanical voice. "They often resurface when triggered by external stimuli or emotional states." "Why do you ask?" She hesitated, unsure if she should share what she'd seen. But Aegis wasn't just a machine. It was her confidant, programmed to assist and understand. Taking a deep breath, Kelith recounted the vision. "I think I remember being saved, as a child, by a human." Aegis processed this silently for a moment. "You were separated from your family during an accident on a moon outpost when you were young," it confirmed. "Records indicate a human explorer intervened and ensured your survival. However, details about his identity have been scarce." Kelith nodded slowly. Her people rarely spoke of that time. It was too painful. After her parents' deaths, she'd been taken in by a human research team, learning their language and customs while growing up among them. Over the years, she built a life for herself, becoming a xenobiologist dedicated to studying alien ecosystems. But now, standing amidst the endless void of space, she realized there was still an unanswered question burning within her. Who was the man who saved her? Determined to find answers, Kelith accessed the station's archives. Flickering screens displayed old logs, maps, and reports. Hours passed as she sifted through data, her fingers tracing lines of text until they grew numb. Finally, buried deep in a forgotten file, she found a name: Captain Elias Venn. He was listed as part of a deep space exploration unit decades ago, known for his daring rescues and unwavering sense of duty. But then, just as suddenly as he appeared in history, Elias vanished. No further records existed after his retirement. Kelith stared at the screen, a mixture of gratitude and curiosity swirling inside her. Whoever this man was, he had changed her life forever. And now she owed it to herself, and to him, to find out why he disappeared. As the station hummed around her, Kelith made a decision. She would track down Captain Elias Venn, no matter where his trail led. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of purpose ignite within her, a fire fueled not just by science, but by the simple need to say thank you. The days that followed were unlike anything Elias had experienced in years. Kelith stayed at the cabin, her presence bringing a warmth and vitality that had long been absent from his life. At first, he resisted the idea of her staying. After all, she was an alien, a scientist with important work to do elsewhere. But Kelith insisted, saying there was no rush, no mission more urgent than the one she'd come here for: reconnecting with him. Each morning began with quiet routines. Kelith would sit by the fire, sketching notes or analyzing data on her portable console, while Elias tended to small repairs around the cabin. By afternoon, they'd venture outside together, exploring the rugged terrain surrounding his home. Caliph marveled at the strange flora and fauna of Orindor, documenting species she'd never encountered before. Elias, though reluctant at first, found himself drawn into her enthusiasm, pointing out hidden paths and sharing stories of the planet's history. Their conversations deepened over time. They spoke not just of their pasts, but of their dreams, the things that kept them moving forward despite the weight of their struggles. Caliph shared her passion for preserving endangered ecosystems across the galaxy, explaining how every species played a vital role in maintaining balance. Life is fragile, she told him one evening as they watched the mist roll over the mountains. But it's also resilient. Even after disaster, new growth finds a way. Elias listened intently, struck by her optimism. He hadn't thought much about purpose in years. Survival had been his only goal. Yet hearing Caliph speak reignited something within him, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, he still had something to offer. One day, as they hiked through a dense forest filled with towering trees and glowing fungi, Caliph stopped suddenly. She knelt beside a cluster of plants, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "These are incredible," she exclaimed, pulling out her scanner. "They're bioluminescent organisms adapted to thrive in low light. This could be key to understanding how ecosystems evolve under extreme conditions." Elias watched her work, amused by her energy. "You really love what you do, don't you?" he asked. She glanced up, smiling. "It's not just about loving it. It's about making a difference. Every discovery helps us protect these worlds, and the people who depend on them." Her words lingered in his mind long after they returned to the cabin. That night, as Caliph pored over her findings, Elias sat by the window, staring out at the stars. For so long, he believed his place among them was over. But now, with Caliph's unwavering belief in second chances, he wondered if perhaps he still had a role to play. The next morning, he approached her hesitantly. "Caliph," he began, his voice cautious, "if I wanted to help you with your work, would you let me?" Caliph looked up, surprised but delighted. "Of course. Why do you ask?" He shrugged, trying to downplay the significance of his question. "You've shown me there's still value in trying. Maybe I can contribute somehow." Her smile widened, and she stood, extending a hand. "Then welcome aboard, Captain Venn. Together, we'll make sure these ecosystems survive, for everyone." For the first time in decades, Elias felt a sense of purpose stirring within him. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a start. And as they prepared to leave Orindor behind, heading toward the stars once more, he realized that healing didn't have to happen alone. Sometimes, it took someone else's light to guide you back to yours. Their journey through the stars eventually brought Caliph and Elias back to her homeworld, a place of shimmering oceans, towering crystalline trees, and skies painted in hues of violet and gold. It was a world unlike any other, teeming with life both familiar and alien. For Caliph, returning home after so many years felt like stepping into a dream. But this time, she wasn't alone. Beside her stood Elias, the man who had once saved her life and now walked alongside her as an equal. As their ship descended through the atmosphere, Caliph glanced at Elias, noticing how his eyes widened at the sight below. "It's beautiful," he murmured, his voice tinged with awe. "It's home," Caliph replied softly, her glowing skin reflecting the light streaming through the viewport. "And today, it's yours too." They landed in the heart of Lumora City, a sprawling metropolis where humans and aliens coexisted in harmony. The streets buzzed with activity, vendors calling out wares, children laughing, and scholars exchanging knowledge under the shade of luminous canopies. Word of their arrival spread quickly, and soon a crowd gathered to welcome them. Among them were members of Caliph's adoptive family, the human researchers who had taken her in after her parents' death, and leaders from her own species, eager to meet the legendary explorer who had shaped Caliph's destiny. Standing before the assembled crowd, Caliph stepped forward, her presence commanding yet gentle. She addressed the gathering in both human languages, and her native tongue, ensuring everyone understood her message. Today, we celebrate not just survival, but connection. She began, her voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. We stand here because of one person's bravery, a man who risked everything to save a child he didn't know, a stranger whose actions changed my life forever. Elias shifted uncomfortably beside her, unused to being the center of attention. But Caliph didn't let him shy away. Taking his hand firmly in hers, she continued, "This is Captain Elias Venn. He gave me hope when I had none. He taught me that even in the darkest moments, kindness can light the way." The crowd erupted into applause, cheers echoing through the city. Some called out words of gratitude, while others simply bowed their heads in respect. Elias looked around, overwhelmed by the outpouring of emotion. For decades, he had believed himself unworthy of such recognition. Yet here he was, surrounded by people celebrating not just what he had done, but who he was becoming. Later that evening, during a quiet moment away from the festivities, Elias found Caliph standing on a balcony overlooking the city. The twin moons cast a soft glow over the landscape, bathing everything in silver light. "You didn't have to do all this," he said, joining her. "I'm not the hero they think I am." Caliph turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Heroes aren't perfect, Elias. They're just people who choose to act when others might turn away. You did that, for me, for those survivors, and for countless others throughout your life." He sighed, gazing out at the horizon. "I still carry the weight of what I couldn't save." "And you always will," Caliph admitted. "But that doesn't mean you stop trying. That's what makes you remarkable." For the first time in years, Elias allowed himself to believe her. Standing there, amidst the beauty of a world he'd helped preserve, he realized that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building something new, something hopeful. As the moons rose higher, casting their light across the galaxy, Caliph and Elias stood side by side, united by shared purpose and gratitude. Together, they proved that even in the vastness of space, no act of kindness goes unnoticed, and no debt remains unpaid. Caliph's journey began with a single step into the unknown. Armed with the name Captain Elias Venn, she set her course for Earth's orbital archives, a sprawling repository of humanity's history preserved in digital vaults. The station orbited high above the planet's surface, its metallic shell glinting faintly in the sunlight. As Caliph approached, she couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. This was where the past lived, where fragments of lives long gone were stored like whispers waiting to be heard. Aegis accompanied her as always, its holographic form flickering gently beside her. The archives contained centuries of data, it reminded her. Finding specific information about Captain Venn may take time. "I know," Caliph replied softly, her luminous skin casting a soft glow in the dimly lit corridors of the archive. "But I have to try." Inside, the air was cool and sterile, filled with the hum of servers and the occasional beep of terminals. Rows upon rows of screens lined the walls, each displaying snippets of human achievement and tragedy. Caliph navigated through the labyrinthine system, searching for any mention of Elias Venn. Her fingers danced over the controls, scrolling through old mission logs, news articles, and personal journals. It didn't take long for her to piece together parts of his story. Captain Elias Venn had been a celebrated figure during his prime, a daring explorer who ventured into uncharted regions of space, often risking his life to save others. He had earned medals for bravery and accolades for leadership, but something had changed. A few years before his retirement, records showed a sharp decline in his missions. There were no official explanations, only rumors of an incident that had shaken him to his core. Caliph paused when she came across a grainy image of Elias. It was an old photograph, taken during one of his expeditions. His face was younger then, his expression confident and resolute. Yet even in this frozen moment, there was a hint of weariness in his eyes, as though he carried burdens too heavy to share. She felt a pang of sadness. Whoever this man was, he had sacrificed much for others, including her. Her search eventually led her to a classified file labeled Operation EOS. Accessing it required special clearance, which Caliph didn't possess. Frustrated but undeterred, she turned to Aegis. "Can you bypass the security protocols?" Aegis hesitated, its interface flickering briefly. "It is possible, but doing so would violate interstellar laws." Caliph sighed. "I'm not asking you to break rules recklessly. But if we don't find out what happened to him, how can I ever thank him properly?" After a moment of silence, Aegis nodded. "Very well. I will proceed cautiously." Within minutes, the file unlocked, revealing details that sent a chill down Caliph's spine. Operation EOS had been a rescue mission to save a colony trapped on a dying planet. Despite Elias's best efforts, the operation ended in disaster. Many lives were lost, and though it wasn't entirely his fault, Elias blamed himself. Afterward, he retreated from public life, disappearing to a remote colony world called Orindur. Caliph leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed by what she'd learned. Elias wasn't just a hero. He was a man haunted by failure. And now, more than ever, she felt compelled to find him. Not just to express her gratitude, but to remind him that his actions still mattered. That saving even one life, her life, had made all the difference. As they prepared to leave the archives, Caliph looked out at Earth spinning silently below. Somewhere out there, beyond the stars, Elias Venn waited, and she was ready to follow the trail wherever it led. "Let's go, Aegis," she said firmly. "We're going to Orindur." The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. Caliph sat across from Elias, her glowing skin dimmed to a soft luminescence that matched the warmth of the flames. For a while, neither of them spoke, Elias staring into the fire, lost in thought, and Caliph watching him with quiet patience. She could sense the weight he carried, the invisible chains binding him to this isolated life. But she knew better than to rush him. Sometimes, silence was the best way to invite someone to open up. Finally, Elias broke the quiet. "You said I saved you," he began, his voice low and hesitant. "But what do you really know about me? About why I'm here?" Caliph leaned forward slightly, her expression gentle but intent. "I know enough to understand that you've sacrificed more than most people ever will. And I also know that whatever happened in your past, it doesn't erase what you did for me." Elias sighed, rubbing his temples as though trying to push away old memories. "It's not that simple," he murmured. "Saving one life doesn't make up for losing so many others." Caliph tilted her head, curiosity mingling with empathy. "What do you mean?" For a long moment, Elias hesitated, as if deciding whether to trust her. Then, slowly, he began to speak. His words came haltingly at first, like fragments of a story too painful to tell. He recounted Operation EOS, the doomed rescue mission that had haunted him for decades. How he'd led a team to evacuate a colony on a collapsing planet, only for disaster to strike when part of the surface gave way. Dozens of lives had been lost, including children who reminded him daily of his failure. "I couldn't save them," he admitted, his voice breaking. "No matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I risked, it wasn't enough." Caliph listened without interrupting, letting him pour out years of guilt and regret. When he finally fell silent, the room felt heavy with unspoken emotions. She took a deep breath before responding. "You can't carry the weight of an entire planet on your shoulders," she said softly. "Those people trusted you to lead them because they believed in you. And even though things went wrong, you still gave them hope. Isn't that worth something?" Elias shook his head bitterly. "Hope doesn't bring back the dead." "No," Caliph agreed, "but it keeps the living going. You gave me hope, Elias. You pulled me out of the darkness when I had nothing left. If not for you, I wouldn't be sitting here today." Her words struck a chord deep within him. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since their meeting. There was no judgment in her gaze, only understanding and gratitude. It was a look he hadn't seen in years. "I didn't do it for thanks," he muttered, almost defensively. I know, Caliph replied with a small smile. That's what makes it mean so much. As the night wore on, they continued talking about his missions, her childhood, the paths their lives had taken. Caliph shared stories of growing up among humans, learning their customs, and finding purpose in studying alien ecosystems. In turn, Elias listened intently, surprised by how much he enjoyed hearing about her journey. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of connection, a reminder that he wasn't as alone as he convinced himself he was. By the time the fire burned low, both of them were exhausted but lighter somehow. The walls Elias had built around himself were beginning to crack, letting in slivers of light. And Caliph realized that this wasn't just about thanking him anymore. It was about helping him find peace, with himself and with the choices he'd made. As they prepared to rest for the night, Elias glanced at her one last time. Why are you really doing this? He asked quietly. Caliph smiled, her glow brightening faintly. Because sometimes we all need someone to remind us that we're still worth saving. Caliph stood at the edge of the clearing, her glowing skin dimmed slightly by the thick mist that clung to the forest like a second layer. The cabin before her was modest, a small wooden structure with peeling paint and smoke curling lazily from its chimney. It looked almost forgotten, as though it had been swallowed by time itself. For a moment, she hesitated, her hand hovering near the door. What if he didn't want to see her? What if he rejected her gratitude outright? But then she reminded herself why she'd come this far. Taking a deep breath, Caliph knocked firmly on the weathered wood. Inside, there was silence, so long that she began to wonder if anyone was home. Just as she considered knocking again, the door creaked open slowly. A man appeared in the doorway, his face lined with age and weariness. His dark hair was streaked with silver, and his once strong frame seemed thinner now, weighed down by years of solitude. Yet his eyes, those piercing, storm-gray eyes, were unmistakable. This was him, Captain Elias Venn. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Elias stared at her, confusion etched into his features. Who are you? He asked gruffly, his voice rough from disuse. Caliph's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain calm. My name is Caliph, she said softly. I've come a long way to find you. Elias frowned, leaning heavily on the doorframe. Why? She took a step closer, her bioluminescent skin casting faint shadows on the ground. Because you saved my life, she explained. Years ago, when I was just a child. Do you remember? A moon outpost. It was cold, and I was alone. You found me. Recognition flickered in his eyes, but only for a brief second. He shook his head, turning away. You must have the wrong person, he muttered. I haven't done anything worth remembering in a long time. Caliph felt a pang of frustration, but she refused to give up. Stepping forward again, she placed a hand gently on the doorframe, stopping him from closing it. Please, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't sure. You don't know what your actions meant to me, to my family, even after they were gone. You gave me a chance at life. Elias froze, his shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. Slowly, he turned back to face her, his expression guarded but softer than before. That was a lifetime ago, he said quietly. People change. Lives move on. You shouldn't waste yours chasing ghosts. I'm not chasing ghosts, Caliph replied firmly. I'm thanking someone who mattered, someone who still matters. Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Elias studied her for a long moment, searching her face as though trying to find some trace of deception. But all he saw was sincerity, the kind that couldn't be faked. Finally, he sighed and stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. The inside of the cabin was simple yet lived in. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering light across worn furniture and shelves lined with books. Caliph glanced around, taking it all in, while Aegis hovered silently behind her. Sit, Elias offered, his tone less hostile now. If you've come this far, I suppose you deserve an explanation." As they settled by the fire, Caliph felt a spark of hope ignite within her. This wasn't going to be easy. She could see the walls Elias had built around himself, but she was determined to break through them, one conversation at a time. Caliph and Elias's journey took them deep into the heart of a volatile region of space known as the Ashen Expanse, a place scarred by remnants of an ancient interstellar war. The area was notorious for its unstable energy fields, abandoned outposts, and eerie silence. Few dared to venture here, but Caliph had chosen this route deliberately. She knew it would lead them closer to their next destination, a dying star system where unique ecosystems clung precariously to existence. What she didn't anticipate, however, was that it would also force Elias to confront ghosts he'd thought he'd left behind. As they approached a derelict station drifting in the void, Aegis detected faint life signs emanating from within. "There are survivors," the AI reported, its holographic interface flickering with concern. "But their condition is unknown." Caliph turned to Elias, her expression cautious yet resolute. "We can't ignore them. If they're stranded, we have to help." Elias hesitated, his jaw tightening. He recognized the insignia on the station. It belonged to Operation Eos. This was one of the outposts involved in the failed rescue mission that had shattered his spirit decades ago. Memories surged back unbidden. The cries for help, the crumbling ground beneath his feet, the faces of those he couldn't save. For a moment, panic gripped him, threatening to pull him under. "Elias," Caliph's voice broke through his thoughts, soft but steady. "You don't have to go inside if you're not ready, but I'll understand if you want to try." Her words were simple, yet they carried immense weight. She wasn't pushing him. She was giving him a choice, and for the first time, Elias realized he didn't have to run from his past anymore. Maybe facing it head-on was the only way to truly move forward. "I'll go," he said finally, his voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. "If there's anyone left alive, they deserve answers." Together, they boarded the station, stepping into darkness, lit only by emergency lights blinking sporadically. The air was stale, heavy with dust and decay. As they moved deeper, they found survivors. 3 individuals huddled together in what remained of the control room. Their faces were gaunt, their eyes hollow, but when they saw Elias, recognition flared. "You?" one of them whispered, his voice hoarse. "You're Captain Venn." Elias froze, bracing himself for anger or blame. But instead, the man continued, "You saved us once before. We never forgot." The others nodded, their expressions a mix of gratitude and sorrow. They explained how they'd been stranded after the collapse, surviving on scraps and hope until now. Though they carried scars, both physical and emotional, they harbored no resentment toward Elias. Instead, they thanked him for trying, for risking everything even when success seemed impossible. Caliph watched silently, her empathic ability sensing the raw emotions swirling around them. When the survivors asked why Elias had returned, she stepped forward. "Because he's still fighting," she said simply, "and because some debts are meant to be repaid, not with guilt, but with courage." Inspired by her words, Elias stayed to help repair the station enough for evacuation. Working alongside the survivors, he rediscovered the camaraderie and resilience he'd lost years ago. By the time they departed, the group had forged a new bond, one built not on regret, but on mutual respect and healing. Back aboard their ship, Elias stood at the viewport, gazing at the stars. "I didn't think I could face them again," he admitted quietly. "But maybe I needed to." Caliph smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes, the hardest battles aren't fought alone." Through the ashen expanse, they sailed onward, carrying not just memories, but newfound strength. The journey to Arinder was long and arduous, a voyage that tested both Caliph's resolve and her patience. The colony world lay at the edge of known space, shrouded in mystery and danger. Few travelers ventured there willingly. It was a place where sunlight barely pierced the thick mist that blanketed the surface, and stories of hostile wildlife kept most away. But none of this deterred Caliph. If anything, it fueled her determination. She had come too far to turn back now. As their small spacecraft descended through layers of swirling clouds, Caliph peered out the viewport, her glowing skin casting faint shadows on the walls. Below them stretched an endless expanse of jagged mountains and dense forests, cloaked in perpetual twilight. It was beautiful in a haunting way, like a dream half-remembered. Aegis hummed softly beside her, its sensors scanning the terrain for signs of civilization. Orindor is classified as a high-risk zone, Aegis reminded her, its holographic form flickering slightly. Weather patterns are unpredictable, and some areas remain uncharted. I know, Caliph replied, her voice steady despite the unease creeping into her chest. But if Elias is here, I'll find him. They landed near a settlement called Blackridge, one of the few inhabited regions on the planet. The town was sparse, with crumbling buildings made of stone and metal scattered across uneven ground. Locals moved about cautiously, their faces wary and weathered. Caliph stepped out of the ship, feeling the damp chill of the air wrap around her like a second skin. Her alien appearance drew curious stares, but she ignored them, focusing instead on gathering information. At a dimly lit tavern, she approached the bartender, a grizzled man with scars crisscrossing his forearms. I'm looking for someone, she said carefully, a human named Elias Venn. The bartender froze, his eyes narrowing. What do you want with him? He asked gruffly. Caliph hesitated, choosing her words carefully. He saved my life when I was a child. I've come to thank him. For a moment, the man studied her, as though trying to decide whether to trust her. Finally, he sighed and leaned closer, lowering his voice. Elias doesn't see visitors. He keeps to himself up in the mountains. Folks say he's haunted by something, some mistake from his past. No one goes near him unless they have to. Caliph nodded, understanding more than the man realized. Haunted or not, Elias deserved to know that his actions had meaning. Can you tell me where to find him? The bartender gave her directions reluctantly, warning her of the dangers ahead. The path isn't safe, he muttered. Watch yourself. With Aegis guiding her through treacherous terrain, Caliph set off toward the mountains. The climb was steep and unforgiving, the mist growing thicker with every step. Strange sounds echoed in the distance, growls and screeches that sent shivers down her spine. Yet she pressed on, driven by a mix of gratitude and curiosity. Days passed, each one harder than the last. Supplies dwindled, and the cold seeped into her bones. But just when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, they found it, a secluded cabin nestled among towering trees. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a sign of life within. Caliph paused, catching her breath. This was it. After months of searching, she had finally reached the end of her journey. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, her heart pounding in anticipation. Whatever awaited her inside, she was ready to face it.